Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Karis Circle. Karis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books, and Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. Karis is very honored to celebrate author and activist Thenmozhi Soundararajan in conversation with Atlanta writers and activists Shelley Anand, who is the author of I Love My Body Because and Lakshmi's Mooch, Anjali Enjeti, who is the author of Southbound and The Parted Earth, and Gayatri Sethi, who is the author of Unbelonging. Gayatri is going to be our MC tonight and our conversation holder. We are all here together to celebrate the book birthday of Thenmozhi's groundbreaking new work, The Trauma of Caste, a Dalit feminist meditation on survivorship, healing, and abolition. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by Raksha. Raksha Inc. is a Georgia-based nonprofit with a mission to promote a stronger and healthier South Asian community through confidential support services, education, and advocacy. Raksha works towards healing, empowerment, and justice for survivors of violence. And Raksha is one of our favorite community partners. I see that Aparna, who is the director of Raksha, is in the chat. So thank you, Aparna, for all that you do for all of our communities. We're very honored always to work with you. We could talk all day about the accomplishments of all of these folks. So I'm not going to read everyone's official bio because you can read them all on our website, but I am going to read Thenmozhi's bio so that you can know a bit more about Thenmozhi. Thenmozhi is a Dalit American artist, community organizer, technologist, and theorist. Currently, Thenmozhi is the executive director at Equality Labs, which she co-founded. Equality Labs is the largest Dalit civil rights organization working to empower caste-oppressed people in the U.S. and globally. Through her work at Equality Labs, Thenmozhi has mobilized South Asian Americans towards dismantling eons-long systems of oppression with the goal of ending caste apartheid, gender-based violence, white supremacy, and religious intolerance. Thenmozhi previously co-founded Third World Majority, an international media training organization and collective that supported people from disenfranchised groups in telling their own stories in their own way. Her intersectional, cross-pollinating work, research, education, art, activism, and digital security helps to create a more generous, global, expansive, and inclusive definition of South Asian identity, along with safe spaces from which to honor the stories of these communities. Thenmozhi's work has been recognized by the U.S. Congress, the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center, the Producers Guild of America, the Diversity Program, the Museum of Contemporary Art, the Sorbonne, Source Magazine, Utne Reader, the National Center for the Humanities, the National Science Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. So we could go on and on. The point is that we are in very esteemed company tonight. I'm very, very honored. And I just want to say in the spirit of that, you are doing very hard work and at times emotionally and even physically dangerous work. And so we are intentionally creating a very welcoming and loving and supportive space. So we encourage everyone who is here with us tonight to honor the intention of that space and come here with love and support for this book on your book birthday. So thank you for choosing to celebrate with Karis. It is truly a gift to us as well.
Oh, I am so thrilled to be here and really excited to be part of this conversation and to be held by such beloved community. So thank you.
Well, let's get going. Thank you, ER, for this wonderful welcome. Welcome, everyone, dear friends from Raksha, Purna, Saqib, Jamila. Welcome, everyone. We're here to celebrate the book birthday. So let's begin on that joyous note and just marvel at this gift, this gem, this treasure, this gift that you have given us. Congratulations, Thenmozhi. And thank you with all our hearts for writing this book. It's essential. Such an important, timely, moving, uplifting book. And to get going, I wanted to invite ER to come back and ask us a question to sort of set foundation, sort of set the ground with terms and definitions. And then I will walk us through some questions, invite each of our conversation partners to chime in, and conclude with a healing kind of meditation. We will get to questions at around in about an hour or so. So that's kind of our general flow for the evening. And thank you all for making time to be here and share space with us. ER, you've had folks come into the bookstore, and thank you. Thank you for hosting this conversation. Y'all are wonderful. So they've been seeing the cover, and you've been receiving some inquiries from as a bookseller, and I wanted you to ask us that question to get us going.
Yeah, so Charis is a multiracial space, and one of the things that folks have had a lot of questions about, particularly since Isabel Wilkerson's new book, which also references caste, is what does caste mean in the context in which you were speaking of it? What does caste mean in a South Asian context? Because your book and Isabel Wilkerson's book are seeking to expand understandings of caste, but first I'm realizing that there may be some folks, our audience tonight is multiracial and multicultural, religious as well, and folks may not understand the very basic groundings that y'all are starting from, particularly as this is in some ways an in-group conversation that we're allowing folks to participate in and listen to. And so I'm wondering if you could begin with just, can you talk to us a little bit about what caste is, what Brahminism is, what is this that you are responding to in this book, so that folks can have a sort of one-on-one before we move to the higher level conversation?
Sure. Thank you for that question, ER. And, for all of the folks that are listening, one of the things about being a caste abolitionist is that it's a lifetime journey of co-learning with so many different communities. So even if this is like the 100th talk that you've gone to about caste, or this is your first, there's always new insight, because we're always unearthing new knowledge from outside of our trauma that we've had in growing up around this system. So, I think for folks that have never really heard of the term caste, or maybe only know it through kind of having some initial connection to it through Isabel Wilkerson's work, one thing for people to know is that caste is a system of exclusion, and it is analogous to race, but not the same as race. And it has its origins in religious scripture in South Asia from around 2000 BC. And like all systems of exclusion, it's based on a lie, on a social fiction, with the idea that there was a certain people at the top that wrote those religious scriptures, who were priests or from the Brahmin caste. And they decided that every other profession and caste that people should be in, was lesser than them and had less spiritual purity, therefore should face more and more increasing pollution and exclusion. And as a result, there were even a group of people that were considered untouchable and outcast because they were completely out of the system. Now, it's obviously a lie. No one gets to decide anyone's position towards the divine. But it's such a persistent system of exclusion, especially for those of us that are from South Asia, because it's centuries old and it impacts over 1.9 billion people in the world today. So 1 out of 4 people in the world experience some form of caste discrimination. And caste is so wounding because, again, it's not changeable, because it's literally determined by the family that you're born into. So you are born into your family's caste, and that then determines the whole of your life, from where you live, who you marry, what kind of job you have, and your experiences, both in terms of your experiences in terms of systemic exclusion and your proximity to structural violence. And I think what's so important for folks here that are not South Asian is that, we could definitely have a conversation that was all about caste in South Asia, because it is very much a serious issue where we are seeing a crime happen against caste-oppressed people, or Dalit, which is the term that we use, every 15 minutes. And really vicious crimes like lynchings and murders and rapes. But what we're also here to talk about here is how caste has become part of the American fabric of social inequity. And that's because wherever South Asians go, they bring caste with them. So, around Charis Books and in Georgia, you have a very big South Asian American community, and there are cases of caste discrimination there. And I think that's actually probably what's the hardest thing for most people of color to kind of get their head around, because it's like, well, isn't that a brown person discriminating against another brown person? Yes, that is absolutely right. And that's because we may have been racialized under the category of South Asian, under white supremacy, but it's a category that's like fraught with tension, because we have all of these hegemonies and historical traumas of stuff that happened back at home. You know, whether they're divides of language, divides of faith, divides that are connected to genocide or other mass atrocity, and critically, divides related to caste. And that's what gets replicated here, because there's no reason for caste to happen in the United States. And yet we see significant discrimination where 1 out of 4 caste-oppressed people experience physical and verbal assaults, 1 out of 3 discrimination in educational settings, and 2 out of 3 experience some form of workplace discrimination. And that's why over half of the Dalits that we have surveyed in the context of this work that we've done around looking at caste equity say that they are so afraid of what happens when people find out about their caste that they prefer to live closeted. Mm-hmm. So this is the terrain of our discussion that we're going to be getting into. And terms that, you know, you'll start to get used to hearing is caste privilege and caste oppressed, because that's referring to people who are from, you know, people who are caste oppressed come from the bottommost caste that experience both untouchability and exclusion based on where they are in that hierarchy of caste and the caste pyramid. Caste privilege or dominant caste people refers to people who have experienced systemic privilege and are part of the upper parts of the system. And you'll also hear things like Brahminism. And this is a key term for people to understand, because just like we wouldn't talk about anti-Blackness without talking about white supremacy, which is the animating ideology that allowed for all of us to be racialized, so too with caste, the animating ideology that set up this really virulent hierarchy is called Brahminism, named after the caste that actually wrote those scriptures. And to say that something is Brahminical, or to talk about Brahminism, is not to isolate an individual or even one caste. It's actually to talk about the system that was built through this animating ideology. And so there's a lot to talk about. And this is why Isabel Wilkerson, you know, used the framework of caste to talk about what was happening in terms of the unjust laws and the racial fabric in the United States, because there is a unique historical kind of connection between Black communities and Dalit communities from a legal perspective and from a movement perspective. But what she was writing about is that this idea of caste gets imprinted across many different kinds of societies. And in the United States in particular, there's a legal history where many abolitionists, you know, especially after Jim Crow, were looking for language to talk about how to talk about racial rights, and they look to caste law for that. And that's why there is that whole history that she's pulling on. So I hope that helps for people that are trying to get their handle on, is this about racial justice? Is it about caste equity? And the answer is it's about both, but we're actually talking about a very specific system that has its impacts across all these contexts.
Thank you for clarifying all of that. It really just sets a foundation for us and helps us get more curious to read. And as you can see, I was so blessed with an advanced copy. And the previous conversation we had, I didn't show you that I also had bookmarked it. I'm wondering if you might treat us, since this is a celebration, we're going to make you work, okay? It's your party, it's this book party, but we're going to make you work. Would you please read us a segment of your choosing so that we might really get a deeper look into the book? Some of the people who have joined us today have not yet accessed the book, so I would love for them to get a little bit of a preview, and hopefully that moves them to access their copy right away.
Well, I'm going to read a section about ancestors, and that's because we are here to talk about our intergenerational trauma and to understand how we're tied to each other through wounds that were not of our making, but through which we have much power to heal both ourselves and backward in our lineage. So this is a section where I talk about my own ancestors, and in talking about them, I want to bring them in here. And I hope also as you listen, you bring your ancestors into this conversation so that they're also sitting in empathetic witness with all of us. So let's get started. We were never alone. There is no point where our ancestors leave us bereft, without a lineage of power and resilience, but we have to be open. We have to listen, and we have to find our place along an intergenerational path towards freedom. Listen to the wisdom of your ancestors. Acknowledge that we are part of a flow of time, with some people having sacrificed so much so that we could be here today. Those who will come after us, for whom we will be the anchors in time, will take forward our pursuit of freedom. I always think about my ancestors and how they had few options in their lives. Yet despite punishing conditions and dehumanization, they loved their children. I know that they did, because I feel that love even today. And I think about how it shows up in my mom's hands and how much preciousness and care she has for me and my sister. Maybe there was not always enough, but there was always so much love. For love is my ultimate inheritance from my Dalit ancestors. At a time when we were dehumanized, devalued, and lacked bodily autonomy and self-determination, my ancestors chose life. And that commitment to life allowed them to dig down into the reservoirs of their immense souls to offer deep, loving care to their children and their family in impossible conditions. Love sustains you in times of darkness. Love is the foundation of who I am. That love is what actually created the conditions for me to be. To share that love backward in time for those ancestors who did not get the care they needed. To care for them now in the present is to let them know I see them as they truly are, luminous, beautiful beings without limit to their potential. And in my healing sight, I sense this is how they see me too. Together, we are freed in this realization. We can't really ease the pain of what happened to them in the moment, but we can witness them from where we are now and love them and give them grace. Let us know that they are with us and that we can send, and they are sending love back to us too. And to witness them with such humanity gives us healing in present time.
Oh, thank you for this. Thank you so much, Thenmozhi, for reading this segment in particular for us. Anjali, I'd like to invite you to respond not just to what Thenmozhi has shared so far, but also just to your response to the book. So let's begin with you and your response.
Thank you so much, Gayatri. I appreciate it. What a beautiful passage from Thenmozhi. That was actually one of my favorite passages in the book. It was so beautifully done. What I appreciate about this book, well, there are many, many things. I could go on forever. But one of the things I love about this book is not only the way that you honor your ancestors, but it's also a book that is a call to action that involves all of us. But I will say that what I found in particularly most valuable, coming from a dominant caste history myself, is how you deconstruct fragility and defensiveness, and how important that work is. I've been thinking a lot about the denial in our communities. And how harmful it is and how destructive it is and how violent it is, but also how silent folks are about it. And you know, and I feel that your book offers several passages that really get folks to think critically about whether or not whether or not their dominance is serving them in a serious or meaningful way. And what is it about that makes equality feel threatening? You really turn that subject on its head. I've been asking myself, as part of practice in reading books about white supremacy, but also in this book, is in what areas am I fragile in ways that maybe I still don't care to admit to myself? Where am I still holding on to defensiveness? What sort of other corners of how I interact with the world is it showing up in ways that I'm still not aware of as I should be? That section in particular, I mean, you talk about fragility throughout the book, but those sort of deeper passages about fragility were, I felt like it was a great place to me to reflect on the myriad privileges I have, but also privileges of caste, which are not as obvious in my life, simply because I was raised in the Catholic Church, and I was not raised among a large Indian community. But what I've been able to do on this journey is sort of see caste dominance as an inherited privilege, that even if it doesn't seem to show up in ways I would expect it to, it's always there and it's part of my heritage. And so deconstructing it and dismantling it is as much as a responsibility for me as someone who has never lived in India or identified as Hindu, as it is for somebody that is actually Hindu and living in India. And so I appreciate the way that you talk in such depth about dominance and fragility, and how we can find myriad ways to seek how we are being advantaged in order to be part of the solution to abolish it. Sorry, that was very long-winded, but I loved this part of the book.
How about you, Shelley? What did you what did this book bring up for you?
Yeah, thank you, Gayatri, and thank you so much, Thenmozhi, for this beautiful gift of a book that you've given us. I mean, for me, I think it really spoke to me in so many ways. It spoke to me as someone who's been kind of doing this deep healing work that previous ancestors' generations have kind of been avoiding, around, you know, how we've been harmed and how we've harmed each other. You know, my parents were both born in refugee camps after partition, and there's a lot of unhealed trauma there that I've kind of been spending my you know, young adult life and adult life working through, and this I found to be kind of a part of that, and being able to kind of think through all sorts of things, like our origin story and like who we are and how we identify now, and how who our ancestors were. You know, so our family was in present day Pakistan in a multi-religious intercaste space, and that got destroyed in multiple ways due to communalism, due to extremism, due to British colonial rule. And so there were these stories that got told that we're a Hindu family, that we're XYZ, where that wasn't necessarily the truth, right? This like extremism took over within generations of my family. Whereas, if you go to that part of South Asia, we all, have a little bit of Shia Islam in us. We have Sikhism in us. I have a Sikh great grandmother, and a lot of that got erased. And so that erasure and that full story not getting passed on and told because of extremism, because of anxieties and fears. And that's what oppressors are. They are fearful people. And they kind of foment that anxiety. And so being able to bring this lens of caste to all the other aspects of, that intergenerational healing is such a gift. Even being able to have the language to talk about it with my children, right? I told them, okay, mommy's going to be doing an event, go to bed, don't give papa a hard time. What's the event about? Well, I'm talking with Thenmozhi auntie about caste. They're like, well, what's caste, mommy? And I had language. I'm like, it's a lie. It's a lie. It's a system that was created to oppress people. And they know that I spend my days fighting for immigrants, fighting for workers. And another point that you brought up that I'm so grateful for as a labor rights activist in this country and an immigrant rights activist is how caste oppression is showing up in a very real and violent way in this country. We had a case here with a temple that was trafficking in Dalit workers on visas and paying them $1 a day. That is not an abnormality. That is not the reality of labor abuse within the South Asian community, and how that intersects with language, religion, and caste is very real. And the fight that you've been, putting before, local governments in California and university systems in the tech industry, we need that down here in the South, because we have it. We had the Signal case where these welders were trafficked in on the H-2B program. And so the systems of labor, immigrant labor that enable labor trafficking are harming caste-oppressed communities as well. So people, even within the diaspora, that are like, that's a problem over there, not here. That's a lie, because it is a problem here. And so I really appreciate that lens as well, because we have more tools in the toolkit in how we talk about oppression and how we talk about, how can a South Asian person be discriminating against another South Asian person? Well, we need to have those conversations and disrupt our white supremacist legal system that only sees national origin as, country of origin and not looking deeper into the community. So there's so much in this book, and so much of it is a gift, all your deep research and studying, and it just makes me want to, continue on this journey of learning and unlearning.
Thank you, Shelley, for naming so many of the offerings of the book. It's a handbook, it's a tool for healing, tool for conversations. It is, it's really calling, I heard you say, Anjali, that it's calling us to have a reckoning with ourselves and kind of really do some deep work around, where am I still in denial? Where am I still in misunderstanding? And I wanted to sort of pull that thread into the next question, which is, part of what the book sets out to do is to center Dalit folks, right, Thenmozhi, and to center the healing and survivorship and the feminism of Dalit folks who, thank you, ancestors, thank you, community, but also it's an intervention for those who are misinformed about caste. And so you did some terms and definitions. What are some of the misunderstandings or denials about casteism that this book aims to sort of offer an intervention and correction? I'd love to hear from you a little bit more on that, Thenmozhi, in pulling back the thread from what Anjali had shared.
Well, I think one of the things that strikes me both about what Shelley and Anjali said is that, in many ways, breaking the silence about caste has taken such a long time, because in South Asian communities where caste originates from, there is such a taboo to acknowledge and name that this problem exists. And I remember from the beginning, when I was growing up as a young child, there was just constant pushback. People saying, oh, it's not that serious. You're making it up. Oh, you're confused because you grew up here. Actually, it's not that big of a deal. Class is a bigger issue, please don't make, I even had this one person say, not only is caste not a big deal, but, you should maybe concern yourself with the plight of the quote unquote red Indian, using this very offensive term for Indigenous people. Instead of focusing on issues that don't matter, And I felt that pushback my entire life, this diminishment, this gaslighting, even though within caste-oppressed communities, we are seeing all of the headlines. We know and have family members that are facing structural exclusion. And, there's just so many headlines about Dalit murders, Dalit rapes, Dalit lynchings. So it's almost like you live in a parallel reality where you have an apocalypse of rights being removed from you and, no safety whatsoever. And then another world where dominant caste people are telling you you're absolutely wrong. Just be quiet. Don't air our dirty laundry out in front of Americans, which is another thing that I heard. You're breaking the community by, talking about these issues. And I think fundamentally what you realize is that actually we're not breaking something, we're actually revealing something that has been so terrible and so difficult for our community to really address head on, because I think all violence breaks meaning. And when you think about what Shelley shared about her family experiencing, the violence of partition and living in refugee camps, there are so many stories like this across, South Asian immigrants that come to the United States that have survived appalling conditions, whether it's the Sikh genocide or the Tamil genocide or just mass atrocity from caste. And yet, as soon as they come here, it's almost like that life didn't happen. And then they try to put on a really good face for their children to be like, well, we're American now. That is the old me. This is the new me. And just let's not, we're just going to operate as if we'd have no history and move forward. But that doesn't work. And that's not actually how our nervous systems work. That's not how intergenerational trauma works. This is not any way for a community to actually thrive. We are actually held hostage from our pain. And so that's why this book was really an attempt to create a different intervention into caste, where we're not just using our minds, we're actually using our bodies. And we're going slow enough for us to say, caste is a problem. And not only are we not going to ignore it, we're going to demand healing as part of the way that we address this. And healing is so critical because a lot of times the study of caste is focused only on the consequences of Dalits. But when you actually pull the camera back, you actually see how much caste is taken from all of us who come from a society where caste is very active. And the caste privileged have their own wounds, and the caste-oppressed also have their own wounds. And because we're in such different worlds, we're never in the same conversation. So this book was really an attempt to allow us to see each other from our different vantage points, and also offer some tenderness in us being able to come to the table together so that we can address, what I call the soul wound of caste, which is this intergenerational, pain that exists within us from this, really despicable system, and let it go so that it never happens again. And that's why so much of the work that we're doing here is ancestral work. We are breaking generational curses, and we're also finding and training ourselves to have new ways of working and being with each other. And this work is particularly urgent given the fact that we are in a time of ethno-nationalism in our homelands, and we're seeing polarization split us everywhere across the country. So the book is meant to be a very particular kind of medicine for a people that have been in denial of how long they have been hurting, and to give permission to find ease and grace in the pathway to healing.
Page after page just really invoked healing. And I know that people who approach the book with open minds and open hearts will really be moved. I know that all three of us who are responding and in conversation with you have been really moved, not just with information and data, but also just moved to action. And I'm wondering if we might now think a little bit about folks who will read the book. And so that's your first action. You know, of course, I'm a teacher, so I'm going to assign that as homework. So I'm like, your first assignment is read the book. Please read it. All right. Second assignment, what do you think we could do? What are some of the thoughts around actions? And while you think about that, Thenmozhi, I'll invite Shelley to name maybe very quickly just 2 or 3 actions that are emerging for you as a result of reading and studying this book.
Yeah, I mean, I have been in conversation with my family. I've been, specifically talking to my parents a lot about it, because I definitely grew up in one of those households where it's like caste is an India problem and it's not a here problem. It's old, it's illegal now. It's not like it was back when, these texts were written. And I think, having, my parents kind of confront their caste privilege, I don't think is, something that they've even done. And so I think those are conversations we're having, and they're not easy. And so I think, a call to action of sorts is that for those of us that come from, caste privileged backgrounds, and you are caste privileged if you, like Thenmozhi talks in the book, if you don't have to hesitate to share what your last name is or where you come from, or who your parents were. If those aren't things that give you pause and that you're able to share where your family's from and your family's history, you are caste privileged, because that is not a reality for our Dalit siblings, And so I think that is something that we need to really address head on. And, I had this discussion, like I learned so much from this book. And so learning about this day that Dr. Ambedkar started about, burning the Manusmriti and saying these affirmations. And I was talking to my partner about it because we're always looking for some rad holidays to celebrate. And, my dad was like, well, why would you? I was like, Papa, have you heard of this holiday? And, he was like, I haven't even we didn't learn about Ambedkar, even though he wrote the Constitution, which is wild to me, and talks about the education system. We had this back and forth, and he's like, well, why would you need to focus on such an old text? We have laws now that are banning this form of discrimination. I'm like, those laws aren't being enforced. The data shows how frequently are people, their rights are violated. They're getting raped. Their land is being stolen from them. They're being discriminated against in the workplace. Hate crimes are being committed against them. They're being murdered. And the law enforcement isn't doing anything. The adjudicators aren't doing anything. And why is that? Because they get to maintain power, right? Why do they get to maintain power? Because these religious texts tell them that. And so we have to untie all of that. And that is very hard. It's hard for us who, are so removed from it, but we grew up with it. And then it's even harder for them, but it really births really beautiful things that you don't even know about. Like my mother, I found out she grew up in an intercaste space and went to an intercaste school and had people telling her like, don't sit next to that boy. And she was like, why not? And I don't think these conversations would happen if I hadn't read that book and I hadn't, started those conversations. So I think having the conversations that can be born out of reading this book are such a gift.
They truly are. And in addition to initiating those brave conversations, I think we kind of, the caste privilege or, dominant caste folks, I think some of the disinformation we have that leads to our denial is kind of this thing that we're told that this is a difficult conversation. It's not. It's a brave one, and I think we are braver for it thanks to the so many tools, so many conversation starters. You know, we have some history in here, the appendices. Oh my gosh, Thenmozhi, kudos on the research, all of the appendices, all of the things that educators in particular and parents might be able to rely on to do exercises. I mean, really, you really put so much thought and effort into creating something that would meet folks wherever they are, whether they're new to understanding casteism or whether they've been the ones like some of us here, you know, who had disinformation around it and denial around it. You know, there's the casteless, the so-called casteless people are the caste privileged. I'll just say that, right? So if you ever hear somebody say it's not a thing, just know that's, you know, us outing ourselves, that it is our privilege talking. So in addition to conversations, brave ones, and study, so what I'm saying is my action is study it in collective, study it with co-learners, start a book club. Aparna is here. Aparna, I could totally see this being a book study with folks, you know, in your community, that folks will get together, you know, all of the aunties and the ones especially who are interested, invested in not being those stereotypical aunties that younger generations want to vilify. We could get together and have an auntie study group, you know, unlearning casteism in the community, and the tools are all here. So that's one action. What do you think, Anjali?
So, you know, what I thought about so much, Gayatri, when I was reading this book is how caste is absent in so many organizing spaces. How, you know, and I will admit to being one of these folks where when I am building a coalition for some kind of direct action work, I will often think about things like racial representation and ethnic representation and religious representation and class representation and ability representation and sexual or gender identity representation. But I'm still not thinking about caste. And this is a huge problem. And I need to, and I hope all organizers, and I see so many wonderful organizers in the discussion, I hope we put caste on par with all other initiatives to be inclusive and to be diverse. I hope it's automatic, right? Where we're not just thinking how many Black people are in the room, how many Muslim people in the room. We are also thinking about caste. How many Dalits are in the room? You know, we have to really see, and within the South Asian community too, you know, I think, you know, the South Asian community in general is so diverse, which I think makes us wonderful, but it also causes us to build barriers between one another and therefore sort of freeze effective organizing. And I think we need to make sure that caste is examined, is interrogated within our community when we organize actions, and that we are being inclusive, because you know, caste discrimination is not something that many people talk about. It's not on the morning news shows. Right, with the exception of, you know, when a big tech industry is found to have caste discrimination, or the temples are or violating workers' rights, but it's otherwise not part of our conversations, general conversations about systems of oppression in the United States. And we need to find ways to make it integral to all of the organizing work we do, whether it's around intimate partner violence, whether it's about abortion, whether it's about voting rights. Caste is a huge factor in any cause of action that we organize for. So we need to make it part of that system of where we are naturally thinking about caste inclusivity when we are working towards justice.
Absolutely concur. And Fatma Kanu in the comments gave us an example of how they in their workplace have really made that, advocated to have that done. So I think that might be, there are examples out there of folks who are doing this in an intentional way in the spaces that they lead or facilitate. So those are really tangible actions that we can take. Then Maury, are there any invitations to action for those of us who are here, so honored and blessed to be here in the space with you today? You know, please give us some work, give us some assignments. Would you kindly unmute yourself?
So the way that the book is structured is that, you know, we follow caste, you know, from the internal, the interpersonal, and the structural domains. And I think there's lots of great places to do work around that. And you heard that from the different folks that are here. You know, first and foremost, I think that people really need to do their work about understanding their nervous systems and how is your nervous system wired to the discussion and the practice of caste. Because for the caste oppressed, there is one set of experiences, which is about fear and anxiety and stress and caste harm because of, you know, facing discrimination and exclusion and bullying and all of that. But I think also quite crucially for caste privileged people, there is a way that nervous systems are wired for fragility. And so a very small amount of caste stress leads to epic meltdowns and a fragility that often stops the flow of civil rights. And, you know, similar to other Black mindfulness practitioners, you know, the work that we've done in this book is basically provide a very, you know, practical set of tools for people to start to build their resilience or the discomfort that comes with talking about such a deep taboo. And the point of this is not that we're always going to agree as a community, but we're not even able to have the conversation because of the fragility of the bigoted. And so if you are someone who's related or works with some of those bigots that are working to stop the human rights and civil rights of caste oppressed people, one thing that you can do is work on your resilience to be able to hold space for those folks and de-escalate them. You know, because you're much easier, it's much easier to de-escalate someone that you're in a personal network of privilege than it is for the oppressed to do that. And that's part of how we start to even the burden of who is really dealing with caste. Like, it shouldn't just be on the oppressed, it's got to be all of us, right? So that's like one assignment I would give to everyone on the individual level, is to work on that mindfulness, work on that self-reflection. There's exercises that help you map your own caste lineage, which I think is very, very hard for some people to do because of all of the historical trauma and incidents that people are fleeing from, and that there's intentional generational breaks in terms of the discussion because parents don't want to pass on what they went through or what they've seen. And so you have to work to kind of get that information from the many different generations in your home. But once you have that, you have a clear sense of, this is my work. This is my path, right? And then on a practical and tactical level, you know, we are in a moment of civil rights where we have, you know, thousands of workers and organizers across the world who are asking for caste to be added as a protected category to the list of the non-discrimination policies of all organizations. And that might feel like such a simple ask, but it's actually a profound one because it's an acknowledgement of the tremendous violence and wage theft and exploitation that caste oppressed workers are facing in multiple industries. And it's a sign that your organization or your corporation is willing to be a welcome place for all workers. Because right now, many organizations are not in compliance with their civil rights and human rights obligations because of the significant amount of caste discrimination that's existing in those institutions. And I'm so glad, Shelley, that you mentioned those cases, because we are in a moment where we have two active cases. You know, the state of California is suing the Cisco Corporation for litigation, and the Baptist temples, you know, which, you know, have been, you know, allegedly from the workers, you know, performed wage theft and, you know, trafficked these workers to work $1 an hour to build temples across the country. And, you know, we have to look at ourselves in the mirror as a South Asian community, that when we are seeing such significant amount of exploitation, discrimination, and labor violations, what are we doing? You know, and I think that, you know, I saw in the chat that someone was saying is that, you know, that some of the community deny that it's an issue here. Well, we've already seen that. We know what it's like when white people deny racism. We also know what bigots do when they throw a temper tantrum about the teaching of critical race theory and our legacy of slavery. You know, I think as South Asians, we have to have the courage to look at our historical violence that we've endured and not turn away from that history, but lean into it with the lens of healing, transparency, and accountability so that we can let it go. But I think for too long, just because someone fancy said that's not real or that's not a thing, you know, people never wanted to challenge that, because that's actually the thinking that is generated under Brahminism. We don't challenge the people in power. Well, guess what? That terrain of control is over. And that's because there are so many feminist and racial solidarities that are working to say, we don't want a world that is run by the bigoted. We want a world where all of us can thrive. And that's why it's so critical to address this conversation of caste, because especially if you're not South Asian, you might be like, oh, this is not my thing. This is not my issue. I have so much I need to focus on. I can't be thinking about this. But I want you to think about the fact that in the UK, the prime minister is someone who is caste privileged. And in the United States, our vice president is someone who's also caste privileged. So two of the largest democracies in the world have people who have caste privilege, and we have no context or notion of how their politics might inform the way that they show up around racial justice issues. You know, we know they're like general political bent, but, you know, we would not allow that in terms of any other candidate and their backgrounds. We would actually ask these questions. We would have some sort of measure. But when these things are invisible to us, we don't know the kind of power. And if you think about even outside of the state and you think about big tech, the major corporations that run tech, we have so many upper caste, CEOs that run those companies that are actually creating racist surveillance tech against BIPOC communities. Caste really shows up there too, because casteist mindsets leads to racist mindset. And if we have people who, you know, are taking advantage of affirmative action policies, but then running companies that are biased in their workplaces and then creating biased tech, whose fault is that? You know, this is about us informing about how we understand all of the ways that systems of oppression and those people in the power and people in power work together. But if we aren't informed and we're not working together, certainly the people in power are. You know, so I think we have to be very smart to understand our liberations are linked, and we need to be able to build a joint conversation around these issues.
That's really poignant and so powerful and moving, that we all have work to do. And, you know, we can begin by initiating these conversations and not participating in the delusion of denial, you know, asking these questions. And the book just offers so much, including what Fatma Kanu was saying, was kind of the notion that my family converted to Islam to get away from the caste system. And you have a whole section, and I'm looking at that, Fatma Kanu on page 72, she has a whole section on caste and Islam. So I really highly recommend getting that and then using that to do the family history conversation that you are engaged in. I do invite folks to pop more questions into the Ask a Question. I will try to get to as many of those questions as I can in about 3 or 4 minutes. But to sort of round out this part of the conversation, I was wondering if Thenmozhi, you had any closing thoughts, or if you wanted to lead us in a healing exercise, since healing is such a big theme and thread throughout all the segments of the book, even though it's laid out in these sort of meditations, or whether you just wanted to give us some closing thoughts. You know, you could choose how you would like to round us out before I facilitate and moderate the questions.
Well, I think I'd like to end on some closing thoughts, because, you know, I think one of the things about being in such amazing community with the writers that are here on this call and the folks that are present online and listening is that, caste is always felt to be an unwieldy thing for one person to handle. And a lot of times, like, I'll have one-on-one conversations with organizers around the country, and they'll be like, I just don't even know where to start. Like, just my entire family is so bigoted. Where do I go? Or, I'm afraid if I speak out, I could get hurt in my community, or it's very clear I don't have any allies. And I guess what I wanted to share with you as someone who has a vantage point of talking to a lot of different people and who also did a ton of research for this book is actually there are more of us that want to free ourselves than there are those that want to be enslaved. And we just have to have the courage to take that first step. And maybe you would be the first domino to fall in your community, but I have never seen any community in the United States where the first person hasn't actually brought an entire circle of beloved community who now wants to work on this issue. And that's because doing this work is ancestral work. When you are able to have authentic intercaste and interfaith relationships in this way that this book helps to guide, and that we've seen modeled across the movement, you may lose your privilege, but you actually gain humanity. And there's a new way that you see this world that we're building, and a new kind of opening, because we're no longer seeing each other through these silos and these false projections. And so I just want to leave people with this aspect of hope, because I know it does feel dark. We came out of a very brutal elections here in the United States, and our homelands are ripped apart by genocide and ethno-nationalism. And it might feel like it's impossible to try and find a path forward. But I think there is a path forward, but it begins in your heart. And you got to be able to open up your heart, to have hope as a muscle, and to step into discomfort and use discomfort as a doorway. And, a lot of the journey of this book for me was about going deeper than the rapid response cycle and the fast, hot takes, to say, we need to do better as a species, and we need to do better with each other. And it starts with embodying healing for each one of us. So I just want to invite folks to ask the questions they want, and also to know there is a path forward, and it begins in your heart.
Begins in your heart. Oh, I received that. So we'll just take a moment to receive that. Thenmozhi, we have a question from Smriti, and I'll paraphrase it. She's also a somatic trauma therapist in Georgia, and works with many South Asian folks. And she's wondering what happened before 2000 BC. What was there before caste? And she's curious if that can be a generational or ancestral resource.
Well, I think that's a very interesting and contested question because, the origins of caste are actually deeply a part of how we look at the question of reparations and accountability, and who are the actual indigenous people of the subcontinent. So there's been a lot of battles for many years about this. And also now the Archaeological Society in India also adds a lot of obfuscation to this conversation. So while we do know that, caste had its origin in the mixing of the cultures that happened in, the Mohenjo-daro and that Harappan area, whether it was a natural migration or colonization of Aryan migrants and the local Dravidians, there's just so much contestation because of how ideologically charged this issue is. So I actually, what I would say is that I do not want to get into that mess, because that can be a tunnel that basically ends up being very vicious, and it distracts from the conversation of where we are today. And, I think if, you were thinking about do I, for example, think of a land acknowledgement, would that be, because we have that practice with indigenous people and understanding the genocide related to that. And what I would say is that, in the spirit of land acknowledgement, I think if you are a somatic practitioner that is drawing upon wisdom traditions from South Asia, even something as simple as saying, I'm practicing these traditions, but I also know that these traditions have been rooted in harm, and that there is centuries of exploitation of caste-oppressed people. And I am working in my practice to minimize that harm, and it begins with acknowledgement. And, towards that end, invite, peace and healing to all beings harmed by those systems. Something as simple as that is like a beautiful way to honor the violence without getting down that historical rabbit hole, because we know that caste has existed. We know that there's been domination and violence. Like even before a single English person, put their boots on the ground, there was already, centuries of caste exploitation and slavery and unspeakable violence. Well, we can safely say that and acknowledge it so that we're no longer part of hiding it or being complicit with its erasure.
Thank you for that. And I wish I had written down every word of that acknowledgement. And I was looking in the appendix to see if it's there. I guess you're going to make another appendix with that?
Yes. Yes, I will.
You see me looking. I'm like, oh, it should be in here. So I'm giving you more assignments. See that?
I got an assignment, everybody, not just you. I got an assignment.
We got to transcribe that and have that ready and handy so that when we do these trainings, when we get together in these all South Asian groups, that we do that acknowledgement. Like what a powerful way that would be for us to bring the profound lessons and reflections and meditations from this book into practice. So I'd like that. I'd like a copy of that. All right, so we do have other questions, and I'm actually not going to go into them because I want to invite both Akila and Saqib to read the book, because your questions about where she gets her data, where the comparisons between India and Indian Americans, those are all fantastic generative questions, but probably not for today. And so if you do read the book, you will get some of those answers because it is so thoroughly well researched in how those answers are presented. So I'm going to invite you all to just, since it's her book birthday, we will kind of steer clear of those heavy data questions at this stage of the night. And thank you for those questions. So it looks like there's no other questions. Most of the ones that were in the comments, we already tackled then. I'm inviting Saqib and Akila to please read the book to get their questions answered. So at this point, would you like to do a closing reading for us so we can, celebrate you? And if anybody in the comments would like to congratulate Thenmozhi, would like to offer love and adoration, give her virtual flowers, because if we were together, we'd be offering maybe offered hugs. We'd be masked, though, maybe some of us, and we'd be giving air hugs. And so if you have anything like that you'd like to offer in comments, please feel free to offer your virtual flowers and hearts and hugs and emojis in the comments while Thenmozhi selects a closing thing to read for us.
So I thought that, given that it's the end of the night, this is a great time to kind of relax and do a little bit of an exercise. So I thought we could imagine our caste liberated future together. So, if folks don't mind, for this exercise, I want you to kind of just settle your hips, put your hands on your thighs, and just remind yourself that you're super grounded, feel that connection to the earth, because as I read this, I just want you to actually follow along and close your eyes and think about some of the things that I'm inviting you to bring into your body and to bring into the imaginary as I speak them. So go ahead and close your eyes and take a deep breath and breathe out. You'll notice with that breath, you begin to settle, maybe shake your shoulders a little bit, kind of straighten up your spine. Breathe in again a little bit and breathe out. And I'm going to begin. We often do not get the opportunity to be architects of the future because we are nursing the wounds of the present. But it's important that we do not cede the ability for us to dream of a Dalit feminist future together. Use this exercise to relish your brilliance and expand beyond the violence and touch the freedom that is our birthright. So to begin, close your eyes and ground yourself. Settle in a restful position. Take in your first deep breath and fill your body with fresh, clean air. Feel it expand until it can't anymore. Let all the air go. Take one more deep breath in, feeling your belly expand like a balloon, and exhale. And then let your belly contract as you let all the air out. Bring your breathing to its normal rhythm and notice your body feeling a little bit more calm and a little bit more relaxed and a little bit more mellow. With every breath, root your feet to the earth and feel her reaching back to you, a loving foundation for all that is possible. Find that as you connect with her breath by breath, you become even more relaxed. You are not alone and can feel your inside bathed in rich green earth energy, coming up your feet, into your legs, into your stomach, into your heart. And after a couple more breaths, imagine starshine and sunlight coming down the top of your head. And as that golden and silver light descends down your spine, notice how your shoulders melt and your breath slows with ease. As that silver and gold light lowers into your heart, notice how wonderful it feels when the earth energy meets the sunlight and starshine in your heart. As they swirl in that circuit, know that you are a being connected to life and all of its possibilities. And with each breath, your body feels larger and more connected with everything. And from that place of expansion, imagine that you are in a world free from caste and race and gender-based violence, pain and suffering. You are limitless. And with each breath, you are sitting with joy. And as you sit in that pleasure and wonder, look around in your mind's eye. What does it look like? What are you sitting on? What does it taste like? What does it sound? This is freedom. Who are you with? And how does it feel to share this delicious moment with them? Allow yourself time to paint this picture. And as freedom materializes all around you, your body realizes from the inside out, this is the caste equitable future. A lovely and bountiful smile spreads across your peaceful face, and you sit in gratitude and love for all things in all times and all spaces. And as your future self thinks about the tremendous shifts that have transpired to make caste abolition a reality, you are struck by all that you have surrendered and gained in the commitment to be free. And from that place of love and gratitude, ask yourself, what is one commitment I could make today towards caste abolition? What do I need to learn? And what do I need to let fall away? Give yourself time to explore. And when you are ready, thank your future self and tell them you can't wait to be them. Settle back into the now, where all those possibilities stand before you. Bring your attention back to your breath, back to the movement of your body as you breathe in and out. You can be, do, and have everything you possibly can imagine for dignity is our birthright. As you open your eyes, know that you are loved and the path to freedom is clear. Jai Bhim and Jai Savitri, everyone.
Congratulations and thank you. Deep wells of admiration, adoration, gratitude to you. Please receive all of the love that we're sending your way. Congratulations. Happy book birthday. Happy birthday. Shelley, did you want to add your love and pyar? And I urge everyone to please, and request a copy at your library. That's
yeah, I have mine. Mine is on an iPad, but I just pre-ordered mine. So
Shelley, you're like, here's my iPad.
Here's my iPad. Let me pull it up.
Oh my goodness.
No worries, not at all.
Get the book, and you can order it from Karis. They ship pretty much anywhere. I get a lot of my books from Karis shipped, so you can do that too.
So I'm popping back up to say all you have to do is click this teal button that will take you to the page where you can buy The Trauma of Caste and also buy these other authors' books. So if this is the first time that you've spent any time with these authors, you can also buy their books. We would love for you to support them as well because they're doing beautiful work here in Georgia with all of us. If you enjoyed tonight's event and you already have all these books and you want to support Karis Circle, our nonprofit, you can do that by making a donation of any amount. No amount is too small. It really does support our work and it helps pay for all these wonderful events that we get to do. And finally, I just want to encourage folks to stay engaged with Karis and with all of their work. So Anjali put links to the Equality Lab in the chat, but are there any other links that y'all want to put in the chat while we have everyone's attention? Anything else you want to make sure folks know about?
Well, one thing I wanted to really encourage people to do is to not just buy the book for themselves, but for a young person in their lives or their family. Because I think that there are so many young people that have reached out about wanting to get access to the book, but price is a barrier. And I think this is a time for us to be intergenerational in our movement and to be generous in giving in that way, particularly as there's a lot of attempts to shut down Dalit voices through bigotry and gaslighting. And, I'm very lucky to be with North Atlantic Books that is standing by this book and me, despite whatever violence that comes forward. But this is not a time where people can afford to be neutral, nor is this a time where people can afford to be silent. You need to make your voice heard, and you do that by buying this book and sharing it with your family and going back in an iterative process to really keep this conversation alive and potent. And I'm so grateful to, spaces like Charis Books, because it is independent bookstores that are holding the line around this conversation and creating space for beloved feminist community. And so I just would love for folks to make all those purchases at Charis Books and really also give the folks at Charis Books a lot of love, because as we know, it's very hard to be able to hold courageous conversations at a time when books are being banned. So this is a time where we need to show our power collectively as beloved community, and just so grateful that we're here to do this work together. So thank you, NJB.
Thanks to all of you so much. We truly are so lucky to have these three folks in our local community. So Thenmozhi, I wish you all the best in the rest of your book tour. I hope that it is safe and expansive and wonderful. And thanks to all of you. Thank you, especially to Gayatri for holding the space for us. That's always a hard job, and you make it look effortless. So good night. Stay safe and well. Thanks to everybody watching at home. Good night.
Bye, everyone. Jai Bhim, Jai Savitri. Yes, happy birthday. Happy